Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Case studies in Disability Discourse Analysis. Disability Discourse Analysis has been significantly enriched by case studies from scholars like Beth Holler, Colin Barnes, Leonard Davis, Tom Shakespeare, and Tanya Tyszkowski. Each of these researchers brings a unique perspective to the understanding of how disability is portrayed and conceptualized across various platforms and societal dimensions. From media representations to educational materials and broader cultural narratives, these case studies highlight the profound impact that discourse has on the perception and treatment of individuals with disabilities. They emphasize the necessity of challenging entrenched stereotypes and advocate for a more inclusive approach that respects and values the diversity of human experiences. 1. Beth Holler. Beth Holler is a prominent figure in the field of disability studies, particularly known for her comprehensive analysis of media representations of disability. Her work provides valuable insights into how the media portrays individuals with disabilities, the stereotypes and narratives commonly used, and the impact these portrayals have on public perception and policy. Holler's research is crucial for understanding the relationship between media discourse and the social construction of disability. Overview of Beth Holler's work. Beth Holler's extensive research in media studies and disability explores various forms of media, including television, film, newspapers, and online platforms. Her analysis typically focuses on the content and context of media representations, looking at how these portrayals contribute to or challenge existing societal views of disability. Key themes in Holler's analysis. Visibility and representation. Holler examines the frequency and context of disability representations in media. She discusses both the underrepresentation and misrepresentation of disabled individuals, noting that when disabilities are depicted, they often fall into stereotypical or limiting narratives. Stereotypes and narrative tropes. Common stereotypes that Holler identifies include portraying disabled persons as objects of pity, as burdens on society, or, conversely, as inspirations merely because they live with a disability, the supercrip trope. Her work dissects these narratives, showing how they perpetuate harmful myths about disability. Positive shifts and progressive representations. Despite the challenges in how disability is portrayed, Holler also highlights media examples that have positively influenced public perceptions. These include more nuanced characters and storylines in mainstream television and movies, which offer more realistic and empowering views of life with a disability. Impact on public opinion and policy. Holler explores how media representations can influence public opinion and subsequently affect policy. She discusses the role of media in shaping debates around disability rights and inclusion, illustrating the power of media narratives in both advancing and hindering disability advocacy. Methodological approaches. Content analysis. Holler often uses content analysis to quantify how frequently disabilities are represented in the media and to categorize the nature of these representations. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. She applies CDA to explore the underlying ideologies and power structures within media texts that shape representations of disability. Applications and implications. Media literacy. Holler's findings are used to educate media producers, journalists, and the public about the importance of accurate and respectful disability representation. Her work supports training programs and guidelines for media professionals. Advocacy and policy influence. By detailing how distorted media portrayals can lead to misinformation and stigma, Holler's research supports disability advocates in their efforts to lobby for more accurate media portrayals and inclusive policies. Academic contributions. Holler's analyses contribute to academic discourse on disability studies, enriching understanding of how media influences societal attitudes and behaviors toward disability. Beth Holler's work in analyzing media representations of disability is a cornerstone in disability discourse analysis. Her comprehensive studies highlight the critical role media plays in shaping societal perceptions of disability and the importance of challenging stereotypical and simplistic portrayals. Through her research, Haller not only provides a critique of current media practices but also offers a vision for more inclusive and representative media portrayals of disability, thus advocating for a broader societal recognition of the complexity and diversity of living with a disability. 2. Colin Barnes. Colin Barnes is a significant figure in disability studies, particularly known for his critical examinations of how educational texts and systems perpetuate ableist narratives. His work focuses on the analysis of educational materials and the educational system to reveal how they often embed and reinforce views and structures that marginalize or disadvantage people with disabilities. Barnes's critiques are instrumental in understanding the broader discourse of disability within educational contexts and the implications of these discourses for social inclusion and equality. Overview of Colin Barnes's work. Colin Barnes has extensively explored the intersection of disability, education, and society. His research often centers on how educational texts, such as textbooks, curriculum guides, and teaching materials, along with educational practices and policies, construct perceptions of disability. These educational resources and practices can significantly influence how students, educators, and the general public understand and engage with concepts of disability and normalcy. Key themes in Barnes's analysis. Ableism in educational content. Barnes critiques how educational materials often portray disability through a medical model, focusing on limitations and needs rather than capabilities and rights. He highlights how such portrayals can foster an ableist perspective where disabilities are seen as problems to be fixed or managed, rather than embracing a social model that recognizes environmental and societal barriers as the primary issues. Stereotypes and exclusion. His work also addresses how educational texts can perpetuate stereotypes about disabilities or exclude the representation of disabled people altogether. This exclusion extends to the lack of material that covers the history and contributions of disabled individuals, thereby maintaining a narrative that marginalizes their societal roles. Curriculum and pedagogy. Barnes examines how the structure and delivery of education often fail to accommodate diverse learning needs. He critiques traditional pedagogical approaches that do not adapt to various disabilities, advocating for more inclusive educational practices that recognize and cater to the unique strengths and requirements of all students. Policy and institutional critique. Beyond textbooks and classroom teaching, Barnes's analyses extend to institutional and policy levels. He explores how educational policies can institutionalize ableism by failing to adequately support inclusive education or by maintaining segregated educational settings for students with disabilities. Methodological approaches. Content analysis. Barnes often employs content analysis to systematically evaluate the representation of disability in educational texts and to identify prevalent ableist narratives. Policy analysis. He scrutinizes educational policies to understand how they address, or fail to address, the needs and rights of disabled students. Qualitative research. Interviews and focus groups with educators, students, and experts in disability studies help to gather insights on the practical implications of educational materials and policies. Applications and implications. Educational reform. Barnes's work is used to advocate for reforms in the education system to ensure that it becomes more inclusive, addressing the biases in educational materials and practices. Teacher training. His critiques inform teacher training programs, emphasizing the need for educators to be aware of and challenge ableist narratives and to adopt more inclusive pedagogies. Awareness and advocacy. By highlighting issues within educational texts and practices, Barnes contributes to broader discussions on disability rights and advocacy, promoting a shift towards more equitable and respectful approaches to education. Colin Barnes's critiques of educational texts and systems provide crucial insights into how ableist narratives are perpetuated through education. His work challenges educators, policymakers, and researchers to reconsider how disability is represented and addressed in educational contexts. By advocating for more inclusive educational practices and policies, Barnes's research contributes significantly to the ongoing efforts to dismantle ableist structures and promote a more inclusive society. 3. Leonard Davis. Leonard Davis is a distinguished figure in disability studies, particularly known for his critical examination of concepts like norm and deviance in the context of disability. His work challenges and deconstructs the established norms that define what is considered normal and abnormal in society, providing a deeper understanding of how these concepts influence disability narratives and contribute to societal attitudes towards disability. Overview of Leonard Davis's work. Leonard Davis has contributed significantly to the field of disability studies through his exploration of the historical and cultural construction of normalcy. He argues that normality is a relatively recent social construct that emerged with modernity, and this construct has profound implications for people who are deemed outside these norms, particularly individuals with disabilities. Davis's work is pivotal in examining how the concepts of normalcy and deviance shape societal and individual perceptions of disability. Key themes in Davis's analysis. Construction of normalcy. Davis traces the origin and evolution of the concept of the normal, which he argues was developed in the 19th century alongside the rise of statistics and eugenics. He explores how this concept has been used to classify individuals and populations into categories of normal and abnormal, significantly affecting those with disabilities. Medicalization of disability. His work critically examines how the medical model of disability has reinforced the binary of normalcy and deviance. By treating disability primarily as a medical issue to be cured or mitigated, society reinforces the notion that disability is inherently abnormal or deviant. Cultural and literary criticism. Davis also delves into cultural and literary texts to analyze representations of disability, showing how literature both reflects and shapes societal notions of normalcy and abnormality. His analyses reveal how narratives around disability are embedded with cultural assumptions that influence public perception and policy. Disability and the body. He discusses the embodiment of disability, questioning how physical differences are interpreted through cultural lenses that valorize certain bodies over others. Davis advocates for a reconceptualization of how bodies are viewed in terms of ability, aesthetics, and value. Methodological approaches. Historical analysis. Davis often employs historical research to understand how the concepts of normalcy and abnormality have evolved over time and how these concepts have impacted the lives of people with disabilities. Literary and cultural criticism. He uses tools from literary and cultural studies to dissect how disability is represented in various texts, understanding these representations as part of broader cultural narratives about normativity and deviance. Theoretical analysis. Davis integrates theories from across the humanities and social sciences to build a multidimensional understanding of disability, challenging the normative frameworks that define societal standards. Applications and implications. Policy and advocacy. Understanding the historical and cultural constructions of normalcy can inform advocacy efforts to challenge discriminatory practices and policies that marginalize people with disabilities. Education and curriculum development. Davis's insights are instrumental in developing educational programs that critically address the concept of normalcy, encouraging more inclusive and diverse understandings of human variation. Cultural competence. His work encourages a deeper cultural competence in handling issues of disability, promoting a shift away from viewing disability through a lens of pity or pathology to one of diversity and inclusion. Leonard Davis's examination of norm and deviance in disability narratives provides crucial insights into the social and cultural dynamics of disability discourse. His research highlights the arbitrary and constructed nature of normalcy, urging a re-evaluation of how society defines and interacts with the concept of disability. Through his interdisciplinary approach, Davis not only critiques existing paradigms but also fosters a more inclusive and equitable understanding of disability. 4. Tom Shakespeare. Tom Shakespeare is a prominent sociologist and disability rights advocate whose work critically examines the contrasting frameworks of the social and medical models of disability in public discourse. His contributions have significantly shaped discussions on how disability is understood and addressed in society, promoting a shift from viewing disability merely as a medical issue to recognizing it as a social and political issue shaped by environmental and societal barriers. Overview of Tom Shakespeare's work. Tom Shakespeare's research and advocacy focus on the implications of adopting different models of disability. He critiques the medical model, which conceptualizes disability primarily as a problem of the individual, caused by disease, trauma, or health condition requiring medical care managed by professionals. In contrast, he champions the social model, which views the barriers created by society, not the individual's impairment, as the root cause of disadvantage and disability. Key themes in Shakespeare's analysis. Critique of the medical model. Shakespeare argues that the medical model of disability is limiting and often detrimental because it locates the problem of disability within the individual and focuses on fixing the individual through medical intervention. This model can lead to stigmatization and marginalization, as it fails to address the broader societal barriers that people with disabilities face. Advocacy for the social model. The social model of disability, which Shakespeare supports, emphasizes that societal barriers, such as physical access, lack of reasonable accommodations, and discriminatory attitudes, are the main factors that disable people. This model shifts the focus from changing the individual to changing the society, advocating for structural adjustments to accommodate all citizens regardless of their physical or mental conditions. Intersectionality and complexity. While advocating for the social model, Shakespeare also acknowledges its limitations, particularly its occasional failure to adequately address the lived experience of disability that includes personal pain and illness. He argues for a more nuanced model that incorporates aspects of both the social and medical models, reflecting the complex realities of living with disabilities. Public discourse and policy impact. Shakespeare's work examines how these models influence public discourse and policy making. He highlights the importance of language and representation in shaping public and political attitudes towards disability, arguing for discourse that empowers rather than marginalizes. Methodological approaches. Comparative analysis. Shakespeare often uses comparative analysis to discuss the impacts of different models of disability in various countries and contexts, providing a broad understanding of how societal attitudes and policies vary globally. Qualitative research. Through interviews and case studies, Shakespeare explores personal narratives that highlight the experiences of individuals with disabilities, using these insights to critique and refine theoretical models of disability. Policy analysis. He scrutinizes disability policies to understand how the underlying models of disability influence legal and social practices, advocating for policies that reflect a more comprehensive understanding of disability. Applications and implications. Policy development and advocacy. Shakespeare's insights are used to advocate for more inclusive disability policies that recognize and remove societal barriers rather than solely focusing on medical treatment. Educational frameworks. His work informs educational content on disability studies, encouraging an approach that critically engages with the limitations and strengths of existing disability models. Disability rights movements. Shakespeare's critique of disability models provides a theoretical foundation for disability rights activists to argue for societal and structural changes that enhance accessibility and inclusion. Tom Shakespeare's examination of the social and medical models of disability in public discourse provides critical insights into how disabilities are conceptualized and addressed in society. His advocacy for a nuanced approach that recognizes both social barriers and personal experiences helps to foster a more comprehensive and inclusive understanding of disability, influencing both scholarly discourse and practical policy making. 5. Tanya Tyszkowski. Tanya Tyszkowski is a notable scholar in the field of disability studies whose work extensively explores the role of language in creating and sustaining barriers for people with disabilities. Her research delves into how language, both in everyday use and in institutional contexts, shapes the experiences and perceptions of disability, often creating symbolic and practical barriers that affect the lives of people with disabilities. Overview of Tanya Tyszkowski's work. Tyszkowski examines the subtle ways language functions to exclude or include people with disabilities in various societal spheres. She focuses on the performative aspect of language, how language acts and what it does socially and politically. Her analysis is deeply rooted in a critical examination of how everyday language practices and bureaucratic discourses contribute to the construction of disability as a form of social difference that is often positioned as inferior or problematic. Key themes in Tyszkowski's analysis. Language and social exclusion. Tyszkowski argues that language is not merely a tool for communication but a powerful medium that shapes social reality. She highlights how certain ways of speaking about disability can normalize exclusion and marginalization. For instance, describing people with disabilities in terms of lack, deficit, or dependency perpetuates negative stereotypes and can lead to social and economic exclusion. Discursive barriers. Her work also addresses the creation of discursive barriers, how discourses about ability and normalcy create standards that people with disabilities are often unfairly expected to meet. Tyszkowski explores how these standards are communicated through language in policies, media, and everyday interactions, reinforcing barriers that hinder full participation in society. The power of narrative. Tyszkowski emphasizes the importance of narratives in disability discourse. She examines how personal narratives and stories of disability challenge or reinforce societal norms. Her analysis suggests that changing the narratives around disability can transform how society understands and interacts with people who have disabilities. Institutional language practices. A significant focus of her work is on how institutions like schools, workplaces, and governments use language to construct disability. She scrutinizes official documents, policies, and public communications to reveal how bureaucratic language often categorizes and controls the lives of people with disabilities in limiting ways. Methodological approaches. Discourse analysis. Tyszkowski utilizes various forms of discourse analysis to examine how language constructs disability in different contexts, from policy documents to everyday conversations. Phenomenology. Drawing on phenomenological methods, she explores the lived experiences of individuals with disabilities, particularly how they interpret and make sense of the language that defines or describes them. Critical theory. Her work is influenced by critical theory, especially in terms of examining power dynamics within language use and how these dynamics perpetuate social inequalities. Applications and implications. Policy reform and advocacy. Tyszkowski's findings can inform policymakers and advocates seeking to make language used in laws, regulations, and public communications more inclusive and reflective of the diversity within disability experiences. Educational practices. Educators can use insights from her research to develop more inclusive curricula and teaching strategies that recognize and respect the linguistic diversity and needs of students with disabilities. Cultural change. By highlighting the role of language in shaping perceptions of disability, Tyszkowski's work encourages a cultural shift towards more conscious and respectful language use in both public and private spheres. Tanya Tyszkowski's examination of the role of language in creating barriers for people with disabilities provides critical insights into the mechanisms through which societal exclusion is maintained and challenged. Her research underscores the need for a careful and considered use of language in order to foster a more inclusive society that truly accommodates and values all of its members, particularly those living with disabilities. Conclusion. The insightful case studies by Beth Holler, Colin Barnes, Leonard Davis, Tom Shakespeare, and Tanya Tyszkowski offer profound contributions to disability discourse analysis, providing a critical examination of how disability is embedded within societal frameworks. Holler's focus on media, Barnes's critique of educational systems, Davis's deconstruction of normativity, Shakespeare's analysis of disability models, and Tyszkowski's exploration of language all demonstrate the dynamic ways in which disability is constructed and understood. These scholars advocate for changes that not only enhance theoretical understandings but also lead to tangible improvements in policies and practices affecting the lives of people with disabilities. By continuing to interrogate and reshape the discourses surrounding disability, their work promotes a more equitable society that acknowledges and accommodates diversity in all its forms. Frequently asked questions. What are the main contributions of Beth Holler to disability discourse analysis? Beth Holler's main contributions include her extensive analysis of media representations of disability. She explores how media shapes public perceptions through stereotypes and narratives, impacting societal views and policies regarding disability. How does Colin Barnes contribute to understanding disability in educational contexts? Colin Barnes critiques how educational materials and systems perpetuate ableist narratives and fail to accommodate diverse learning needs. His work focuses on reforming educational practices to be more inclusive of people with disabilities. What is the significance of Leonard Davis's work in disability studies? Leonard Davis is known for his exploration of the concepts of norm and deviance, particularly how these constructs affect people with disabilities. His work challenges the established norms that often marginalize those with disabilities, promoting a broader acceptance of diversity. How does Tom Shakespeare's research impact public and policy discourse on disability? Tom Shakespeare advocates for the social model of disability, emphasizing that societal barriers are the main issues disabling people, not their impairments. His work influences public and policy discourse by advocating for structural changes to enhance accessibility and inclusion. What are Tanya Tyszkowski's key themes in her analysis of disability? Tanya Tyszkowski focuses on how language constructs and sustains barriers for people with disabilities. She explores the performative aspect of language and how institutional language practices can marginalize people with disabilities. In what way does Beth Holler's research address stereotypes in disability media representation? Holler identifies common stereotypes in media, such as portraying disabled individuals as objects of pity or inspirational figures solely due to their disabilities. She critiques these portrayals for perpetuating harmful myths and advocates for more nuanced and empowering media representations. What methodological approaches does Colin Barnes use in his research? Colin Barnes employs content analysis to systematically evaluate educational texts and policy analysis to scrutinize how educational policies address the needs of disabled students, highlighting areas for systemic improvement. Why is Leonard Davis's focus on the medicalization of disability important? Davis's focus on the medicalization of disability is crucial because it reveals how the medical model frames disability as a problem needing correction, often overlooking the societal contributions to disability. He argues for recognizing and addressing environmental and social barriers instead. How does Tom Shakespeare's work challenge traditional views of disability? Shakespeare challenges traditional views by critiquing the medical model and promoting the social model of disability, which identifies societal barriers as the primary factors disabling individuals. His work pushes for a paradigm shift in how disability is understood and addressed in society. What impact do Tanya Tyszkowski's findings have on policy and social practices? Tyszkowski's findings advocate for changes in how language is used in policies and social practices to be more inclusive and considerate of people with disabilities. Her work encourages a shift in discourse that supports dignity and equality for disabled individuals.